Hello, everybody. I am Porter Shreve, Director of the MFA program and a member of the fiction faculty here at the University of Wisconsin. Thank you so much for being here tonight. I hope you're settled in for what promises to be a wonderful evening of fiction. We're coming to you live from various apartments and houses here in the beautiful city of Madison, Wisconsin, where on Saturday I was in shorts and a t-shirt playing full court basketball at the park. And this morning I bundled up to shovel the sidewalks after an overnight snowstorm. I'm sure some of you noticed the upright piano that someone rolled out onto frozen Lake Monona earlier this winter, then left to the elements. It was fun for a while to see people sit down and play Chopsticks or Bohemian Rhapsody or Moonlight Sonata, but it did make you wonder what was going to happen to that piano when the lake thawed. I'm happy to report that the city has removed the piano and it's warming up in a warehouse somewhere safe from Davy Jones's locker. We are here tonight to celebrate another kind of music, the sentence, the paragraph, the story, the chapter, and in particular, the extraordinary work of our graduating Master of Fine Arts in Fiction students, Bella Bravo, Maddie Curtis, Waringa Hunja, Martha Pham, and Amanda Rizkalla. Now in its 20th year, our MFA is one of the best and most selective creative writing programs in the country, and a core part, along with our undergraduate major and postgraduate Wisconsin Institute fellowships, of the vibrant writing community here on the UW campus, in Madison and beyond. Many of our MFA students go on to publish books and win prizes and contribute to the national literary culture. And we have great hopes for the amazing cohort you'll be hearing from tonight. As you'll soon see, their stories have nothing and everything in common. They couldn't be more different in terms of subject matter, setting, style, and form. They're about immigration, mental health, grief, war, homelessness, gonzo filmmaking, lobster traps, faded rock stars, classified government secrets, and free grocery store samples. They're set in Houston, the coast of Maine, LA, Vietnam, and on the road. They're harrowing, creepy, funny, terrifying, heartbreaking, and have elements of the thriller, the fairy tale, the quest, the saga, the lyric coming of age. They're as various as can be, but all share one thing. They're exceptional, exceptionally observed, born of a lifetime of watching and listening and being attentive to the world, of reading everything and taking it all in, exceptionally written and told, imagined and reimagined. I'm so excited about the books these writers are making and excited for all of us as well that we'll get to hear from this range of talents tonight. So let's get started with Amanda Rizkalla, who will introduce our first reader.
Thank you, Porter. I have the honor of introducing Bella Bravo, who is originally from Salt Lake City, Utah, and who worked as a lawyer before joining our MFA program. The book they're working on tackles an ambitious array of pressing issues, such as climate change and immigration, topics that Bella handles skillfully and gracefully in their writing. And not only are they a wonderful writer, they are also an incredibly kind and generous and thoughtful friend. And it's hard to overstate how crucial they have been to our creative writing community here at UW. On the weekend, you can find them hiking, or as they did a few weeks ago, climbing an actual frozen waterfall for fun. And as a side note, if you ever need a tarot card reading, Bella has got you covered. Introducing Bella Bravo.
Thank you so much, Amanda. So I'm going to read from my novel, Smoke Fills the Palace. And this excerpt occurs pretty late in the book. And so I think the only things that you need to know are that the main character in this section, Inga, and her husband, Christian, they're having difficulty communicating and making decisions together. They have a daughter in common, and they live in Sonoma County, California. This is this section is the first wildfire that threatens their home, and Inga and her daughter have escaped safely, but Christian has stayed behind. So Inga decides rather than wait for him to change his mind, which is a rare occurrence, she's going to go back for him. And her next door neighbor is named Kim. So Kim was the kind of friend who would say in the hours after a wildfire evacuation, "I would sneak into the neighborhood from the north. The news says the fire has jumped the freeway. That's far from us. The burn area is huge. Firefighters are swamped. I'm not sure if they've responded to our hill, but if they have, the roads to the south will be blocked, keeping traffic moving away. The north side is closer to the fire. It might even be starting to burn, so no one will be there." Inga headed east, slow with a strong headwind. Along the highway, straight-line winds had torn drought-weak trees from the root, ripped power lines like legs from a spider. Once familiar surroundings lay disaggregated on the asphalt before her. She kept her foot on the gas pedal. As long as the wind blew west, she had time. Black smoke covered the sky, but Inga could make out the shape of the mountain under the blaze. The fire descended, filling the slope's uneven contours like a mold, drawing a line across, brilliant and definitive as the sunset. The complexity of the wilderness that she could once see from her back door had been reduced to orange and black, the flame and its fuel. As she approached the canyon's mouth, the temperature inside the car rose. Inga wiped sweat with her sleeve. She hugged the unstriped curves, unafraid that she'd have to share the road. Wove around telephone posts, fallen like clipped wicks. Cinders twisted around the windshield. A white plastic fence had melted. Now every third or fourth home was alight. The pattern of the fires was eerie. Disaster seemed sovereign, coherent, sparing. Inga passed over pavement that was unmarked, nothing there to burn, but the stream bed next to the road was scorched. The fire had gathered energy in the recess before jumping the road. Then opposite the stream, 3 houses in a row, fire cracked open their roofs, thick plumes spiraled out. Inga couldn't see through the fumes, but she knew if the road was passable further up, it hooked south and followed the dry creek that ran behind their neighborhood. She continued, the smoke surrounded her and then dissipated, cleared the instant she turned. She found her subdivision spotted with fires, but largely untouched. Bright sparks in the bushes looked like lanterns in little caves. They vanished, though, as Inga's headlights illuminated pervasive gray spirals. She handled the corner onto her street carefully. Her hands slid one over the other, a trembling touch on the wheel. She felt her breath tense, arrive as she approached. Clouds of smoke blew in. Through them, she searched for her house. The roof peaks and stucco walls emerged from the haze and brought into focus, with them, a desire for more than survival. There her house sat, intact, a white cube like a small block of ice, the ripples of gray tile, an iron fence, a burdened lemon tree. All the other houses were safe too. The street almost looked as if everyone was simply asleep at 3 a.m., except for the smoke, and Christian darting around the middle of the road with the garden hose. He was coughing and spraying cinders as they landed. Water dropped off their roof and gutters. Several garbage bins had been rolled out into the driveway. Things from inside the house now littered the sidewalk. A bag of flour, old polyester sweaters, hairspray bottles, paper towels, paint thinner. All of these were flammable things. And she stopped the car where Christian's bicycle and a backpack lay in the center of the road. When she opened the car door, it swung from her hand. The wind had changed, south. The rush of air pressed against her entire body. She gasped and struggled to push herself from the driver's seat. "Christian," she screamed, "what are you doing?" When he saw her, terror struck his face. "Get out of here." He ran toward Inga, but the end of the hose caught and he didn't let go. "You have to come with me," she said, closing the distance between them. Her legs felt slow, bending and stepping through the raising heat. A city-sized boiler, ash started to rain. A pile of dry leaves in the front yard closest to them ignited. Christian took off toward the spot fire, yelling over his shoulder for her to get out. He sprayed the flames, they smoldered, smoked, but the hedge nearby kindled. Inga stood watching him, aghast, unsure how to help. Christian yanked one of the trash cans in the driveway and wheeled it to the fire. He strained, the bin lurched, his shoe slipped, and he threw his body into the bin, knocking it over. Water spilled out, rushing into the alley between the hedge and the house, missing the fire. He gained his footing. The fire jumped to an overhanging branch. Christian aimed the hose, but the shower did not reach. Inga took off for the garage. She grabbed her axe. Strength surged through her muscles. She raced past Christian to the tree. Her breath quickened. She passed under the leaves curling with fire. She struck there where the bow met the trunk. Again, each hack was at eye level and sent sparks at her face. Her arms felt solid. When the branch fell, Inga jumped onto the flames, stamped them into the wet ground. Christian grabbed her arm and dragged her from the narrow alley into the street. Leave, only if you come, she said. Christian picked up his backpack and looped the straps around her shoulders. The bag was nearly empty. Clumps of ash gathered in her hair. Her eyes stung. She closed them and felt Christian's heavy hand brush an ember from her head. His force made her shudder. She was suddenly overwhelmed, on the verge of tears. A propane tank exploded. Pap! She looked behind her, searching for the explosion, frightened. I'm staying until I see firefighters. No, said Inga, passing the axe from her right to her left hand. We have to go. She grabbed Christian's wrist, and to her surprise, he yielded. Silently, they took a few steps together. The car seemed to float toward them, but she couldn't tell which was moving them or the car. And in her periphery, she saw Kim's yard start to glow. The firewood that they had left out, the threat Christian had anticipated, shimmered. Flames shot up behind Kim's house, the shaggy bark and branches of the towering eucalyptus aglow. Its flower clusters exploded all at once like fireworks. The thin, finger-length leaves combusted and vanished in waves like the hands of drowning men. Inga instinctively squeezed Christian's wrist, felt him wrench away. A burning branch dropped from the eucalyptus onto the corner of Kim's roof and unfurled. No, Christian yelled and rushed to Kim's house. The hose snaked between Inga's feet. A flame fell to the wooden fence between their houses, and the redwoods out front, no different from the other burning. A gust from the firestorm pushed Christian back. He tripped over his feet. The foam sole had melted and tore from his shoe. The hose sprayed backwards, sending a mist into Inga's face. Christian tugged the hose and pointed the stream to Kim's roof. The hose lifted off the ground. Kim jumped to let it escape. The backpack Christian had given her jostled, and a hollow metal clinked inside, her mother's sunflower tin. He'd saved it. Inga took after Christian, grabbing his shirt and his shoulders. Stop, Inga. Christian shirked her off. Don't you see? Our home is right there. The water arched and fell short on the front half of Kim's roof. Her window shattered. A large dark plume rolled out. Inga's chest tightened. The air smelled bitter, and she had difficulty inhaling. Her lungs rejected the soot. A deep roar and crackles erupted behind her. She froze, gave up on words. Then a sudden jerk. Inga raised the axe above her head and then brought the blade down. It fell in a sharp axe, and as if from a cliff, clacked against the pavement. The hose severed, drooped in Christian's hand. A stream of water flooded the ground and her shoes, a tiny broken dam. Flakes of ash fell and disappeared into the pool like rowboats at sea. Christian dropped the limp hose. This is the only place I have. You and I don't have anywhere else to go. Inga slipped her hand into his. She expected him to grasp the hold so hard it would hurt, like he had when she returned home this spring. But he didn't. He pulled away and ran into the thick. Inga's heart pumped as she drove off. In the rear view, Christian and the house shrank into one dark spot. Orange grew where she knew all the trees had been. Thank you all for listening to that. I have the honor of introducing Madeline Curtis, who I know as Maddie. I thought I would share 3 things that you may not know about Maddie. First, she loves Halloween. Last year, her love fueled, I think, 3 different Halloween parties, as well as a year-round celebration involving a raven puppet, all black attire, gifts of human hair, living in an actual haunted house, and recently inviting a possible vampire inside. If you think that Maddie looks like Wednesday Addams, trust you are not the first. Which brings me to my second fact, comics. Maddie is also a terrific visual artist, currently at work on a graphic novel and many poetry comics. And by now, those of you who know Maddie, even just a little bit, have probably realized that I'm saying only obvious things. You might be able to guess the third fact. Maddie's stories are unforgettable. She seems to be incapable of writing anything short of beautiful, hilarious, and searingly honest words. Okay, and here's Maddie.
Oh, thank you, Bella. That's so kind. Best intro I could ask for. But today I'm going to be reading the beginning of a short story called Ghost Trap. You don't really need much context. It's got a lobster in it. It's pretty creepy. That's all the context. Oh, and the main character is returning to Maine for the first time in 14 years. But I'm starting basically at the beginning. All right, Ghost Trap. Mara promised herself she'd never return to Maine, but she'd break any promise if her sister asked her to. Grace had wanted Mara to be at the baby shower, so Mara came. It didn't matter that they hardly spoke, that Grace had constructed a life for herself with no space for Mara in it. It's nearly midnight. The world pales and dims as clouds streak across the moon. Grace's driveway is carpeted with seashells, white as baby teeth in the dark. The house is so strangled with ivy, Mara can hardly make out the bluish stone beneath. She isn't ready to knock on that door, to greet her sister as the strangers they've become to each other. She can hear the ocean even now, the creep of water on shore. A path of crushed shells vanishes around the side of the house. Mara follows it to a lawn penned in by a driftwood fence. Beyond the fence, there is a crescent of white sand that fills and empties with the ocean. It's just water, Mara tells herself. Buddy isn't going to drag himself from those waves. He's been dead 14 years. Grace isn't bothered by living at the ocean's edge. When Hudson wanted to move closer to his family in Maine, that was no problem for Grace. Grace is a no-problem kind of person. For her, everything comes easily. Mara is an all-problem person. She's nothing but problems, problems through and through. The beach is bracketed by sloping, kelp-covered rocks, just like the ones that enclosed the harbor where Buddy docked the Veronica. Mara used to think that kelp concealed the bodies of drowned people. She envisioned heaps of corpses with fish-bitten eyes, their knees to their chins. Sometimes she swore she saw one stir, reanimate. In her mind, a person lost at sea wasn't dead, only sleeping. Even now, she grows uneasy looking at those rocks, half expecting someone to sit up and meet her eye across the beach. A voice calls to her from somewhere nearby. Mara? Mara turns to see an elegant woman looking down at her from the back porch. At first, Mara doesn't recognize her sister. Much can change in a year. Grace is blonde now, apparently, and wearing a shapeless beige dress that must have been expensive. The linen stretches taut over her rounded belly. Pregnancy looks so absurd on Grace that Mara laughs before she can stop herself. Grace's frown is clearly visible, even in the moon-pale dark. She says, "What are you doing in my backyard?" Mara climbs the porch stairs to join her sister. "I got lost," she says. Grace touches Mara's shoulder. Neither of them likes to be hugged, and says, "I didn't think you'd actually come." "Of course I came," Mara says, though she hadn't thought she was coming either, not until her plane was in the air. She works her mouth into a smile. "My big sister is going to be a mom." "Shut up," Grace draws back. "You must be tired from traveling." "Not really," says Mara. "We should stay up all night talking, like a slumber party." She says it like a joke, but she doesn't want to be left alone, not with the ocean so nearby. Grace says, "I'll show you to your room." She ushers Mara through a sliding glass door into the living room. Mara notes the white wicker furniture, the bowl of ossified starfish on the coffee table. She tries to imagine inhabiting this life, this house, but she can't. This life never would have happened for her. She's her sister's counterweight, a habitual faller apart. No matter how many times she starts over, new cities, new jobs, new relationships, she always slips again. Above the fireplace, there's an oil painting of a lobstering boat. A lobsterman leans over the deck, hauling one of his traps from the waves. Mara knows a painting is no more than colors smeared on cloth, but for a moment she's looking through a window into another time. Any moment, the lobsterman will lift his head and smile at her with Buddy's face. She's 11, on the wharf with Buddy. The Veronica creaks in her stall. The dock rises and falls like a breastbone. Buddy kneels beside Mara, setting a lobster trap before them. It's like a house, he says. With his four-fingered hand, his pinky lost to a boat propeller, he gestures at the hoop through which the lobsters are lured by sacks of herring. This is the front door, and this, he tugs on a mesh pouch within, is the kitchen. He tells her that after the lobster is stupefied with herring, it crawls through another tighter hoop into the final room, the parlor. From there, it has nowhere else to go, no way to turn back. Buddy says this with a smile. He fastens the trap. Behind Mara, Grace says, Hudson's grandmother painted that. Her voice is clipped, almost offensive. Come on, I'll give you a full tour in the morning. Mara blinks, destabilized. It's as though she's been startled from a dream. She says, I'm coming. As Mara passes through her sister's grand house, she wants to admire it, but all she can see is its emptiness. Big white rooms with walls of glass, like lovely aquariums with nothing inside. She remembers the awe she felt the day she, Grace, and their mother moved into the Waverly house with Buddy. The house was only a dingy one-story with plastic siding, beached at the bottom of a cul-de-sac. But to Mara, it was a castle from a story, and Buddy was its king. Mara was sure her life from then on would be out of a fairy tale. Already, she could feel the stain of her father's leaving beginning to lighten. She'd never been as happy as she was the day Buddy took her hand and led her into the Waverly house, and she was never that happy again. Grace deposits her in the guest room. The pillows are embroidered with anchors, and there are sea urchins lined up on the windowsill. As Grace's footsteps grow quiet down the hall, Mara sits on the edge of the bed, sullen as a child. She doesn't want to sleep. She's afraid of what she might dream. And the smell of the ocean is too strong, rancid and damp like a dog's breath. She tries breathing through her mouth, but the salt taste is too heavy. She needs a walk. Drifting down the hall like her own ghost, she passes framed photos of Hudson and Grace at the prow of a sailboat, of Hudson's handsome family in matching polo shirts. Half hidden behind a ficus, there is a picture of Mara, Grace, and their mother at Grace's graduation from Yale. They stand stiff and unnatural together. Mara remembers how they sprang apart after the camera was lowered. The kitchen is a glacial expanse of marble. Mara must be thirsty. Her tongue is rough and dry. She bends to drink from the tap. On her first swallow, seawater scalds her throat, and she retches over the sink. When she straightens, she finds herself looking at a woman she's never seen before. She cries out and stumbles back. More than anything, Mara fears the bleakness in this woman's eyes. She doesn't think she's ever seen anyone so hopeless. Mara raises a tentative hand in acknowledgement of the woman, and the woman's spectral hand lifts in unison. Only then does Mara realize she's looking at her own reflection in the window. She feels no connection to this ghoulish smudge of skin and eyes and tangled hair, this drowned girl dredged up from the sea. The clouds shift, uncovering a pale shard of moon. The lawn silvers and the shell path phosphoresces. The ocean is a bed of shattered glass. Mara feels the pull of that water. She's felt it every day since she was 11. Some deeper creature takes her body over, and she finds herself by the porch. The glass door slides open under her own alien hand, and she steps outside. Shells cut into her bare feet as she follows the path to the driftwood fence. Thorny beach roses snag on her shirt as though to keep her back. She unlatches the gate and walks through. The sand is cool and sparkling like sugar, the ocean tame. This gentle water can't contain Buddy's bones. The tide licks the shore dark and smooth. Each wave carves new patterns into the sand, intricate as ridges on a roof's mouth. Mara moves closer until the first wave folds over her feet and cold sears her mind blank. When the water scuttles back, grains of sand fling from beneath her feet like iron filings to a magnet. She used to stand like this with grace, letting each return root them deeper into the sand. Mara liked to imagine them remaining still until they were fully buried. They would be like two sunk clams, hidden and safe. Tall waves scale the rocks at the edge of the cove, wetting and re-wetting the kelp. Mara is revisited by old imaginings of shrouded, rotting people, but she isn't a child anymore, liable to believe any scary story. She continues across the firm sand to the edge of the beach, where she steps onto the kelp, noting the fleshy give of it, the sturdiness beneath. Unseen barnacles crunch under her feet, and shells clatter down. See, she thinks, just stone. Another wave wets the lowest rocks and swoons the kelp. Dark water muscles through the channels between the rocks, flushing the tide pools. As it seethes back, Mara catches a glimpse of neon orange deep in a trench. She recalls Buddy's grimy, creamsicle-covered lobstering overalls, and fear opens its wings in her, but she bats it away. She's tired of her mind, of the tricks it plays on her. So she fits her body into the gap between the rocks. Walls of glistening black rise up on either side of her, imbricated with mussel shells. A clod of debris has formed at the end of the stone corridor. It's a knot of discarded things, blackened ropes and dented soda bottles, a sodden tampon. In the middle of it all, like the heart of some hideous animal, is a lobster trap. And that's it. Thank you for listening. And thank you everyone for being here tonight. It's very lovely to be able to do this and to be part of this amazing program. Okay, but now let me introduce my lovely friend, Waringa Hunja. Let's see. Oh, here's my thing. Okay. When I think of Waringa's work, I think of her witty, intelligent voice, her observational eye, and her knack for capturing the details of everyday life that others might overlook. Her characters, which I've gotten to know over the over the last 2 years, feel like real complicated people, and I look forward to spending time with them whenever I have the opportunity to read a new chapter. Waringa's writing inspires me to slow down and pay attention to the people and places around me, and to the intricate, tangled threads that connect us to those we love. As someone who is lucky enough to call Waringa a good friend, I am forever impressed by her generosity, her sense of humor, and her encyclopedic memory. Waringa is my personal Google, thesaurus, librarian, Dunkin' Donuts companion, and source of infinite wisdom. I am so grateful to know her, and I am honored to introduce her tonight.
Thank you, Maddie. That was a lovely introduction. So I'll be reading a little bit from a little into my novel. So I'm going to give you some context to set it up. So the main character of my novel is Al. Her father, Maury, is an aging rock star, and a reporter has just published an unauthorized biography of his band. Maury's obsessed with figuring out who spilled his secrets. So Al goes on a quest/journey to meet all of her father's former lovers to see if she can solve the mystery. The excerpt I'm going to read is her meeting the second of Maury's 5 ex-wives. Susanna answered the door while the bell was still ringing, as though she'd been leaning against it, waiting. Al was stunned by her wide, welcoming smile. She almost leaned in for a hug. "I'm so glad you could fill in," Susanna said, holding out her hand for Al to shake. "I really don't know what I would have done." Al blinked. "I'm sorry, I don't." You look so familiar. Have you worked for us before? No, Susanna, sorry, it's Al, Maury's daughter. Al took a half step back, feeling the heat press against her back like a hand. I should have called. Susanna furrowed her brow. She'd always been easy to read. It was as if her face was a window, with her emotions pressing their noses against it, forming breathy clouds. She was like sunshine embodied, all freckled skin and long blonde hair. Even now, Al wasn't sure she could guess Susanna's age to the nearest decade. She'd married a very old man after Maury, which made her seem perpetually young. Alice, she said, what are you doing here? Al had rehearsed her elevator pitch on the way over, but she was thrown by the earlier misunderstanding and couldn't quite get her bearings. Who did you think I was? She asked. Minnie's nanny is sick or something, and she said she'd send a friend over to help out. She was supposed to be here half an hour ago. Al was grateful to have such a simple problem in front of her. She didn't have to ask probing questions or talk about her father. She could spend an afternoon watching a baby and then make up an excuse to leave. I have a lot of babysitting experience. Susanna spluttered a bit, starting to decline Al's offer, but she threw up her hands instead. Would you mind? Really, do call if there's anything. Are you sure? Al nodded. Susanna slipped into tall, glossy black heels and ushered Al in. She'll be hungry when she wakes up. Everything's in the kitchen. Feel free to eat whatever, but I'd prefer if you didn't drink. She pulled the door closed behind her. Al was taking her shoes off when she heard the door crack open again. Susanna poked her head in and said, and no inviting boys over, with a broad grin. Everything about her glowed, as if each of her freckles was a pinprick of light. She was improbably incandescently lovely in that moment, and she was gone before Al could tell her the truth, that she hadn't been thinking about boys at all. Al woke up in the dark, with Minnie's small, hot body pressed against her. They were both covered in a light film of sweat. Minnie was snuffling and grasping, her carefully clipped fingernails faintly scratching Al's neck. The house was so quiet. Al felt like she was trapped in a small dome of sound, filled with Minnie's babbling and smacking. She leaned in close to the baby's grinning face. If there's ever anything wrong, I know you've got good parents, or at least a good mom, but sometimes you'll need someone who isn't your mom, and I hope you'll call me. Or whatever, maybe we'll be holograms when you're older. I promise I'll try. She felt silly, making promises to a giggling, drooling baby, but she figured it was easier to repeat something once you've already said it. The first time she'd said, I love you, she'd only been able to whisper, pressed her words into Jamie's neck, and pretended she'd done it on purpose. Surely that's why children say it to their parents, so they can learn how to say it, what it means, make the words seem less monumental. But Al and her mother had never said it to each other, and it felt like jumping off a cliff. The key must be to not remember the first time you heard it, because she'd done it. She'd jumped like everyone expected her to. She'd been brave, and Jamie had sighed, had run his hand through Al's hair, and hadn't said anything. He made her eggs in the morning and sat at the table while she ate them, sighing and pressing his fingers against his mouth like he was trying to keep a coal warm on his tongue. You're joking, right? He said finally. You were joking with all of that? Al blew on her fork full of eggs. All of what? He hadn't been kind, dismantling her idea of what they were to each other, but she didn't know enough about him or men or love to say if he was being cruel. He had seemed uncomfortable, but he'd done it, and she'd left, and she hadn't said it since. She wondered if it would be morally unwise to practice saying it to her not quite sister. Al didn't think there was such a thing as a child growing up feeling too loved. She'd known kids who were too rich or too coddled, too unruly, insensitive, unsupervised. Al could sense that Susanna was a mom who would say, I love you all the time, before bed, over the phone, in parking lots and doctor's offices, when Minnie got a splinter or her appendix burst. What was one more? She thought probably at least once She should try saying it to someone who wasn't falling asleep at the time. But Minnie seemed like a good candidate, and Al was sick of splitting hairs. I love you, she said, brushing Minnie's hair off her forehead. I love you. Minnie sneezed and relaxed into Al's arms, blinking slowly. She was just sinking back into sleep when the garage door shuddered open. Susanna burst in through a side door, weighed down by bags of steaming, fragrant food. I know you wanted to talk about something, she said, but I'm exhausted. Can we save the emotional breakthroughs for tomorrow? I brought Thai food. Al hesitated, weighing her need to avoid being an imposition against the comfort she felt in this place, and stepped toward the kitchen. Are you sure it wouldn't be? Susanna waved her hands and spun around the room, collecting bowls and 2 pairs of gleaming lacquered chopsticks. Our door's always open to family, she said, turning before Al could see her face. Al had to unbutton her jeans after devouring the noodles Susanna had brought. The spices left a soft tingling in her mouth. She had a brief image of suckling milk from Susanna's breast, the cool relief she would feel spreading over her tongue, and she tried to ignore the dull throb at the bottom of her stomach. They'd each had a glass of wine with dinner, and the combination of alcohol, chili, and the heat left her feeling woozy. She stood and walked toward the patio doors. The air outside was slightly cooler, the breeze conjuring goosebumps on Al's arms and chest. You okay? Susanna asked, patting out onto the deck. She handed Al a glass of ice water and sipped at her newly full glass of wine. Al nodded, and they both let the breeze ruffle their hair and chill the sweat on their foreheads. Susanna pulled a small black tube from her pocket, untwisted the cap, and shook out a neatly packaged joint. Do you mind? I've got a variety if you'd rather something else. I'm okay, but please go ahead, Al said, taking small sips of water. She knew she was conflating a lot of feelings and urges, but she was hard-pressed to think of anything sexier than Susanna leaning out over the deck railing, cradling a glass of wine and blowing smoke out of the side of her mouth. She regretted declining the joint. Why had she turned down the opportunity to touch her lips to something that had pressed against Susanna's? I don't mean to pry, but are you allowed to do that when you're breastfeeding? Al asked, and immediately clamped her mouth shut. She was incapable of keeping anything in when she was like this. A little in love, very in lust, conscious of her thighs pressing together, the prickling of sweat at the small of her back, the catch of her tooth scraping her lip. Susanna snorted and waved away the smoke hovering near her face. It would be irresponsible, but I'm not. First, she wouldn't latch, and the ducts, it really is just plumbing with these things. She grabbed her breasts, pushing them together and looking down into the valley of cleavage she created, before sighing and letting them go. So I stopped, and we found a wet nurse. She drops off milk every morning. We pay her an incredible amount of money, and I can drink and smoke whatever. That must be hard, Al said, unsure. Susanna shrugged and let the night envelop them, hot and dark. Thank you for listening. This was delightful. Thanks so much. I am so honored to introduce Martha, one of my absolute favorite people in the world. My first impression of Martha was that she was super serious and intimidating. She was writing a novel about the Vietnam War, and that I found so intimidating. The more time I spent with her, the more I realized that my impression of her was based around my own insecurities. I thought of my writing as fundamentally unserious and shallow. Martha never made me feel that way. She's never been anything but kind and generous and encouraging. I wasn't doing either of us any favors by believing she was just one thing. Getting to know and love Martha has been a series of pleasant surprises. Just yesterday, she made me laugh so hard my face hurt. Yes, her novel is serious, but it's also sweet and funny and sad and sexy and incredibly bravely human. I'm so lucky to know Martha, not just as a writer, but also a caring, curious, complex person. And I can't wait to learn something new about her tomorrow and the next day and the next. Martha.
Waringa, I love you. Thank you so much for that. Okay, and thank you everyone for being here. I'm going to read you an excerpt from my novel, and I don't think it requires any context. 1945, North Vietnam. The fishing village, a smatter of gray and wood and people, opened east out into the sea. Behind it, mountains of dense green. In the daytime, light sometimes blanketed across the water so that the spindrifts looked briefly like suspended pearls. Swan and Phi were walking the beach, picking up pebbles and shells and depositing them into small piles at random. It was summer, and the girls were avoiding their chores. Tasks, Swan would later recall fondly, that never seemed to garner any sense of urgency so long as it was hot outside. Occasionally, they turned their heads toward the sea to watch the fishermen, tiny specks, drifting in and out of their line of vision as the waves crested and fell. The air sat humid and heavy on their skin, lifting once in a while with the breeze. We should go, Phi said, before it rains. The skies above them were clear. How do you know it will rain? Swan asked. She knew Phi would have an answer, and that once she'd said it, it would seem obvious. Her friend pointed to the west. Just beyond the mountains, dark clouds had started to gather, and it would not be long before it reached the village. Swan looked back out toward the sea. She was suddenly overcome by the thought that the fishermen might not make it back to shore in time. You think they know? Swan gestured toward the specks. That it will rain? It was a stupid question, but she wanted to hear Phi's confident answer. Of course, the other girl said. They do this every day. Now come on. A seagull swooped past their heads. It was so close that Swan could see, underneath its white tufts of feather, a pinkish neck. It plunged into the water and emerged, sleek and triumphant, darting upward towards the sky, a fish between its beaks. Swan and Phi dragged their feet now, letting the sand sift through their sandals. Too bad about the game, Swan said. Phi shrugged. There will be others. These days, Phi spoke with a tinge of adult boredom in her voice. Swan wasn't sure when her friend started talking this way, and that scared her too. She had a sense that things would be different soon, that the lull of summer was merely camouflaging just how quickly change was to come. It was Friday. The two of them and Mai were supposed to go watch the boys' soccer match, but Mai had gotten sick. The only reason they were going to go was so that Mai could see that lanky boy with the gap teeth she liked. They had gone to 3 matches by now, and it was the same every time. Mai would stare dreamily at him, hope that he noticed her, and then leave hurriedly before he had the chance. Now, though, there would be no game. The girls walked on, through the path studded with rocks and shells, toward the packed dirt roads of the village, which had yet to dry from rain the night before. The air grew thicker, and the ground gave way slightly under their feet. What's your father making for dinner today? Phi asked. Not sure yet. You want to come over? Swan and Phi were neighbors. Their fathers owned small adjacent plots of land. Maybe, Phi said, if my grandmother falls asleep early. As they neared home, Swan heard the ding of metal against metal, the echo of hollow wood under a hammer. They turned the corner, and Swan saw a man on the veranda, shirtless and on his knees. Her father must have finally hired someone to come fix the planks that had come loose during the spring. Swan turned to Phi, but the other girl, eager to escape the heat, had already started to mumble goodbye and head into her house next door. Swan paused for a moment before walking toward her own. The man's skin was tanned and glistening with sweat. Knotted muscles stood out from his back. For a wild second, she thought of going to him and pressing her fingers into the knots, feeling them roll beneath the pressure like marbles. He seemed to sense she was watching him and looked up. When she realized it was Din, she felt a rush of hot annoyance. "Come help me with this," he said. She walked over, embarrassed by her own imagination, and suddenly very thankful he could not read her thoughts. "Here," he said, "just put your foot on this plank so it doesn't slide while I hammer it in." When she did not move, he said, "What's the matter with you?" "Nothing," she said. "Right here?" "Yeah." She placed her foot on the middle of the plank, and he started to hammer slowly. It felt like a pulse coming up from the floorboards, pushing against the ball joint of her foot. Beads of sweat clung to the edge of his hairline and on his shoulders. He smelled of tobacco and summer mist. It had been a while since he'd been to the house, but surely not so long that she could not recognize him right away. "You smoke now?" she asked. He looked up, smiling. "Are you offering me a cigarette?" "No," she said, trying to seem offhand. "I was just going to say you smell weird." He smiled again. "What?" she said. "You can take your foot off now," he said. He had stopped hammering. She was still standing awkwardly with one foot jutted out. Swan straightened, flustered. As he stood up, she noticed that he'd grown more than a head taller than her. They had been friends since childhood and had only grown apart after Swan went to an all-girls school a few years ago. It felt like just the other day they were daring each other to eat worms, and she was teasing him mercilessly about the fish-shaped birthmark on his neck, telling him it was a sign he'd stay short forever. Now he was close. She could feel his heat radiating off his body, see the flecks of sawdust that clung onto his chest. For an insane moment, neither of them moved, and she thought it would take almost no effort at all to lean up and kiss him. Last year, when Sun turned 14, she kissed a boy for the first time. It had been part of a dare. Later, she would no longer remember the boy's name or the fact that that year, under Japanese rule, there had been a famine that devastated the country. No, she would only recall that they had gone to the same church, that he was a year above her, and that his lips had felt vaguely papery. She was the first of her friends to kiss a boy, the others not entirely convinced that you couldn't get pregnant from the act. But Swan and her siblings knew better. Their mother warned them in detail how scandals were born. The older woman was under no illusion that keeping the truth from her daughters would keep babies out of their bellies. There were girls from the village who kissed at much younger ages, of course, but they were poor and quickly married off. Too quickly for any of Swan's friends to definitively say whether the baby that soon came after was a result of the kissing or the marriage. It was that kind of place, remote, religious, and gleaming with gossip. Too much time to think and not enough thinking, her mother liked to say. If the neighbors were wary of the corrupted wisdom her mother possessed, they did not stay. Swan had relished in the awe of her friends, more than the kiss itself. Even Fee had seemed amused. But now that Din was in front of her, she was certain that his lips would not feel papery at all. There was a clattering from inside the house. Then came the sound of their house girl, Hien, cursing the stray cat that sometimes they let inside. "Stupid cat," she called. "Show up here again and see what happens." Din stepped back, crouched down to gather his tools into the box, and headed toward the steps. "I'll see you later," he said. "Tell your father I fixed the gutter too. It should be fine the next time it rains." He lifted his hand in a partial wave and walked toward the road. Swan let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. Okay. Thanks, everyone. Thanks for listening. And Now I'm going to introduce my good friend, Amanda. So, Amanda Rizkalla is a graduate of Stanford University and an MFA candidate in fiction at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. She has been published in No Tokens Journal, The Aesthetic Apostle, and Archipelago, as well as the allegory-rich fiction anthology. Her work is forthcoming in the Fabulous Words and Art. It is always such a delight to read Amanda's work. Everything she has ever handed into workshop, everything I've been lucky enough to read has felt like a gift of tiny golden light. It doesn't matter if we're reading about grapes or a hardware store or an internet receipt. Amanda always freshly illuminates for us something essential about what it means to be human. She's just that good. And not only is she an incredible writer, Amanda is also a great cook and an amazing friend. I'm so grateful to know her, and I am excited for all of you to experience her work. Without further ado, here is Amanda.
Thank you, Martha. That was so nice. So I'll be reading the beginning of a short story of mine that was published last year in No Tokens Journal. And it's a hybrid story, so it has these visual elements like receipts and white space and lists. So if you want, you can follow along by looking at the story online. It's called See-Through. See-Through. My youngest asks me why we are leaving when Daddy is still asleep. I tell him because. My youngest has come to understand my answers, that this is how things are. Meanwhile, the oldest has come to understand how mothers work. I ask him how he is doing back there, and he says good. What does he want for breakfast? And he says food. It is never enough. I ask for more syllables. Meanwhile, I drive. It is 4 in the morning, and my sons, 6 and 7, sit between bags of their clothes. The radio is on. They sing the song they like. They look out the windows, saying, "Mommy, Mommy," and asking about Daddy. I tell them about starting over. They ask me why. They ask me how come. I tell them because. Boys, help me with the bags, I say, when the 3 of us get to the new house. They yawn, arms outstretched as they step out into the driveway. When we walk inside, the furniture is still covered in plastic. I walk around the rooms. Running water, yes. Working stove, yes. The lights, yes. 3 large bedrooms, check. Everything as promised. It is about 3 in the afternoon now. We empty out the car, then go to the market. We have sandwiches for lunch. We drive by the school. The older one will be starting out after the summer, passing by the playground, the kids. My phone buzzes and buzzes. I put it on silent. A few weeks ago, Brian couldn't make it to dinner one night, said something came up at work, and I asked him, "Is it a woman?" It was a joke, but he froze. "No," he said. Then he looked at me and said, "Really, no." Then he kissed me goodbye. "I'm only teasing," I said. "Have fun at work." "Max, dinner," I had called out. Jonathan was already at the table and we were both waiting. "Where's your brother?" I asked him. Jonathan shrugged. "Hiding," he said. "We were playing hide and seek." Max came running to me. He held up something pink and small. It looked shredded almost, its lace coming undone around the sides, some drooping piece of fabric. I took it in my hands and held it out. It was crunched up, musky. I immediately set it down, away from us. "Where'd you find that?" I asked him. "On the floor," he said. "Where? Show me." "In the bathroom, under the rug. I was hiding," he said. That night when Brian came home, I asked him how his meeting went. "Very, very well," he said. Brian in numbers. Children, 2. Degrees, 3. Living parents, 0. Toes, 10. Women, 4. I am a millimeter away from sleep. My eyes are getting heavy and my thoughts are heavier. I always thought it would be the other way around. I thought one day I would get the paperwork in the mail and just like that, no more Brian. My husband would not be a husband anymore. I often wondered what I would do if he did. I decided if it happened, I would spend $20 on custom-made stamps and stick one on the return envelope, a stamp of a flag with freedom written underneath it, or maybe the single word independence. Regardless of the stamp, I think about mailing the underwear back, but part of me wants to keep it for DNA testing, identifying her, getting this tested and receiving the results from the lab and sending her, I don't know, an email saying, look, when you did this person, this is what you also did. I would attach photos of my children. There's a service I read about online where you mail a company a DNA sample, and they use it to approximate a hologram of the person at the time the sample was left. Some of my friends have done this with their dogs. They have holographic puppies around their houses running through them. I could have her at my doorstep. See-through, yes, but maybe that is better. But what would I ask her? I would not ask her why. In my experience, that warrants only one answer. I look up the service online. It comes up, pricey. I turn off my phone and fall asleep. The next morning at the new house, I call my mom. How are you holding up? She asks me. I'm doing okay, I say. Hey, Mom, remember that sweater I used to wear all the time in college with what are they called, rhinestones? The purple one. You hated it. Yes, I remember, she says. Do you know where it is? I ask. It might be in a box somewhere. Why? Can you bring it? And don't wash it. When she comes over, the boys are all hugs and kisses for their grandma. We lug bags of towels and underwear and snacks that she came with us to the store to get. Each bag up the stairs, unpacking it all, ripping off the plastic like a second Christmas. My mom insisted on paying, even though I can manage just fine. Max's eyes had widened at the final total on the receipt, but she snatched it away and said that this is what family does before coming back with us here. The boys put the milk in the fridge and the cereal on the shelf and the fruit snacks there too. They are happy that things have their places. Can we stay over at Grandma's? They ask me. I look at my mom, who smiles and shrugs. Don't you want to stay here? We just got here, I say. I can take them for the weekend, give you some time, she says. I look at the two of them, pleading, then agree. My mom and I help the boys pack their bags. As they're about to leave, the boys say goodbye and promise to be good. I kiss their foreheads. Oh, Mom, the sweater, I say. Did you bring it? Oh, yes, it's in my purse, she says. She unzips her bag and hands it to me. Why did you want it again? She asks me. Just because. I need it for something. Call me if the boys get to be too much. When she leaves, I take the sweater to the garage and find a box and some packing tape. I print out a shipping label. After I drop the box off at the post office, I get the house ready. Soon, I will meet myself. A knock at my door. Come in, I say. She does. She is wearing red lipstick. It is all over her 20s, my 20s. She shrugs her purple sweater down to her collarbones, flickering. She looks at me from across the room. I tell her what happened. Brian? No, not my Brian. He wouldn't, she says. Our Brian, and yes, he did. She frowns. Wait, so you left because... I show her the underwear in the drawer. You brought it with you? She asks. I nod. Why? She says. You know how we are. What do you remember? I ask her. I can show you, she says. It's part of my features. She takes my hand. She presses a button. And she and Brian are outside. They are in an alley near the high school the city is tearing down, and all she is wearing is a push-up bra and him. Here he is, sprawled a starfish on the chair her dad made her, and she is sitting on his thigh, and he tastes like water. He asks her if she is okay. And it is midnight and they're on wet grass, and I can feel how she wanted him to love her deeper into the grass, into the dirt. Here she is, wearing white. Do you want to know what your eyes are? He asks her. What? I never told you this. It's like, okay, imagine that there's a pond, a round one, and it has green water inside it. And then imagine that brown fireworks stop mid-explosion and are just sort of stuck in time there, reflected in the pond. That's what your eyes are. And she pulls away. It works both ways, she tells me. What do you mean? I mean, do you want to show me something too? I put my hand on hers. I will stop there. Thank you.
Thank you, Amanda. Wow, just wow. That's what I usually write on a workshop piece from this group. Amazing night of readings. Thank you all MFAs for your incredible work. Thank you all folks out there for coming to this great event. I'm just going to do a quick plug for our great friends and co-sponsors, the Wisconsin Book Festival. And I'm pulling it up right now, and I would highly recommend that you would bookmark it at wisconsinbookfestival.org, where there are so many cool events coming up, including Douglas Stewart in person, Neil Gaiman in person, all kinds of great stuff. But I think the thing not to miss is the Wisconsin Institute for Creative Writing Fellows reading right here, April 14th. Mark your calendars, 7 o'clock. Thank you all for coming out. Have a lovely night.